This is an exclusive presentation from Federated Media. Unholstered.
Welcome to another edition of Unholstered. Hopefully y'all are having a fantastic weekend. If you're just tuning in for the first time, my name is Kayla Blakesley. I am just one of your hosts. During the weekdays, I actually host a news talk radio program right here on WOWO.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Rosales-Scatina. I'm a captain with the Fort Wayne Police Department, and I'm your other co-host on Unholstered. And welcome back.
So we're doing something kind of different here on this edition of Unholstered, which, by the way, if you've missed any previous episodes of Unholstered, you can download them anywhere you download a podcast, which I would encourage our listeners today to do that, particularly when it comes to vehicle pursuits. Sophia, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about pursuits here on the show, but that's kind of what we're getting back into today because, like I said, doing something a little bit different. We are going to have a listener-generated program today. We see your emails, we see your texts as they come in. We kind of compile them all and hit them all at the same time. And by the way, we do have a new text line. If you're trying to reach us, 260-447-1190. That is the number if you want to text in your comments, your questions, your opinions, photos, doesn't matter. 260-447-1190. But Sophia, like I said, we see all the texts, we see the emails, we have them. And it seems like there's a common theme as of late. And I don't know if it's because it's construction season around where we live or if it is because it is summer. So it seems like there's just more vehicles on the road in general. But we've gotten a lot of questions recently about pursuits, about driving, about protocol when it comes to being pulled over, things like that. I'm going to hit you with all of these questions, which in all fairness, Sophia, you have seen these questions. I think last time we did this, I didn't even let you see the questions.
Right.
So
I know the topic at least. So I might not know exactly the questions, but I know most of the topic. So we'll go from here.
I kind of want to start. This one it was more of a comment, but I'd love to get your response to this comment from a listener. She said, would love to hear more about car pursuit policies. I see a lot of these incredibly dangerous things on YouTube. And I'm assuming she's talking about police pursuits when she says car pursuits.
Yeah, I'm assuming that as well.
And she says to her they seem incredibly dangerous. So what would be your response to that? Not that it's a question, but I do think it's a fair comment.
They are extremely dangerous. Anytime someone decides to run from the police in a vehicle, it's extremely dangerous, not only for the officer and the person fleeing, but also the general public who's out there, because we don't know exactly what the suspect is going to do. We don't know where they're going to turn. Are they going to drive on a sidewalk? Are they going to go through a house or yard or something? Because we've had all that happen. And in different cities, you have different things happen. And a lot of cities have gone to the no pursuit policy, which means they will not chase anyone for any reason.
No kidding. I did not know that was a thing. When, how? Is this like over the last couple of years?
No, it's probably been 15 years or so.
Wow.
Just it seems like maybe the more progressive cities have done those kinds of things. Sometimes it happens after a horrific crash where death has occurred. So it's just kind of one of those fail swoops that reactive things that I think that people do instead of looking at the totality of the circumstances.
So let me just, I'm like flabbergasted right now by these cities that are just like done with pursuits. I didn't even know that was a thing.
It could be, yes.
So you mean to tell me there are cities right now that if someone goes out and shoots someone, hops in their car and takes off, the police are not going to pursue that suspect?
There are some cities that is indeed the case, yes. Yes.
Because of how dangerous these pursuits are?
Yes. And public perception of that pursuit. Where here we weigh the reasons for the pursuit. We could be chasing a homicide suspect. We could be chasing someone who just, cranked off rounds.
Someone who kidnaps a kid. Oh, just
yeah,
take
there's
off
so many different circumstances. Now, most of the time that's not the police pursuit. It's more of a chase, maybe for a beginning of an infraction or something like that. But I'll tell you, and this is why I feel traffic stops are so important, is I don't know that most people know this, but Timothy McVeigh was stopped for an illegal registration on his U-Haul truck after the Oklahoma City bombing. His capture was directly related to a mundane traffic violation. So when people say, there was a lot of talk after 2020 that officers shouldn't even stop people for anything involving traffic. And I'm like, well, we get a lot of criminals that way. There was an actual homicide suspect wanted by Interpol that was stopped in a traffic stop for a speeding violation, I believe. So we have real criminals, murderers, all this stuff arrested on a traffic stop for just a minor traffic violation. So, I mean, there's a reason why we do these things. And then we also have the laws to uphold. You know, we know that car crashes are really deadly here in town. We've had a lot of light runners, we've had a lot of speeders, and then they get in crashes, they end up killing someone. You know, do you want us to enforce the red lights? That's one of people's biggest
complaints
issues for us is the traffic speeds, the red light running, the aggressive driving, all of it.
I feel like that's probably the majority of the comments and questions that we do get, which we have done a show on that as well.
Yes, and it is. It's a real problem here, and not just in our jurisdiction, but in a lot of others too.
So when it comes to pursuits, at least here in Fort Wayne, because obviously you work for the Fort Wayne Police Department, would you say overall, Sophia, and I'm not talking to you as a civilian, as a police officer, would you say that in most cases you are a fan or an advocate, you say yes to a pursuit?
I think in a lot of cases they are warranted, but not everyone. For instance, this is my personal opinion as an officer. I don't speak as the Fort Wayne Police Department on this, just as in my experience as an officer. I don't like motorcycle chases.
Yeah.
They usually end up in a crash, and it's usually very deadly for the person that's fleeing.
That's driving, the motorcycle.
Now, I've seen comments, a lot of people, well, you know, you get what you get when you don't follow the law, and I get it. But any loss of life is tragic, and it's hard on an officer if they're involved in that as well. Or if that car crashes into another car carrying a family. Or that motorcycle.
That's where I go. Like, I actually hear that, you get what you get. And a part of me kind of also lives in that space. My concern is the other drivers on the road or walking down the sidewalk or on a bicycle ride. It's the other people.
So our supervisors are tasked. So the officer can call off their own pursuit. That is, once you start it, if you feel it determined that you're going into, say, for instance, a school zone at school time dismissal or arrival, you know, it is up to you to kind of be in that situational awareness where you're like, you know what, this is not worth it. I'm just going to cut this pursuit. But a lot of times, you know, officers are just in the moment. So that's why a supervisor has to come up in the air. There's a policy for that in a certain amount of time. And they have to know the reason for the speed or the reason for the stop, the speed, the area you're driving in. And most of the time when you tell someone, hey, I'm in this area, or as we're calling out the pursuit, we all know what area we're in and if we're coming up to a school zone. So the supervisor then is tasked with either to continue that pursuit or discontinue that pursuit. Now, if we discontinue a pursuit, our policy is that the officer is to slow down, turn the emergency lights and sirens off, and at the closest possible, safest location, turn and go the opposite direction or turn off on a different street and go a different way. Because if we continue following that car, that motorcycle, they just continue to think that we're still pursuing them, which means they still continue to drive recklessly. Now, after that pursuit is called off, whatever they do, you know, because a lot of people continue to drive reckless and then they end up in a crash 2-3 miles down the road.
And just because, let's say, a pursuit is called off, it doesn't mean you stop pursuing, per se, that suspect. I mean,
sometimes we may know who it is if the whole reason the pursuit was we were looking for a warrant subject and they got in a car and took off or something like that. And I know a lot of people, they come in these comments and they're like, well, I don't know why you pursue. You have the plate number and you know who owns the car. But the person driving may not be the car owner.
They probably stole the car.
The car may be stolen and not reported stolen yet. It could be someone's child behind there. It could be, you know, someone's child who then lets someone use that in turn to pay off some drug debt or something. And this person's joyriding in this third person's car. There's a whole list of things that could be. But we can't identify who the driver is. We cannot arrest the owner of the car for getting in a pursuit because we can't prove that the owner was the one that was driving. So the whole, we get the plate and just track them down later, that doesn't work because we have to prove who was in the driver's seat.
Right. It's not quite that simplistic.
It's not that simple.
If it was, pursuits probably wouldn't really be a thing.
Right.
I would be curious. This is not a listener question. It's just a me question. How or why do most pursuits occur? Is it usually because of a warrant arrest, or is it because of someone doing something wrong and then hop it in their car and take it off? I mean, what's the, I don't know, the normal cause, if you will?
It's probably a list of maybe 5 things. So someone either has a warrant or they know they have a charge that we're looking at them for. They do not have a driver's license or their driver's license is suspended. They're drunk. And then the other one is we get a lot is like, I don't know I was running. I just got scared and I panicked. And legitimately, everything's in order. They just,
really,
didn't have the smartest day of their life. So it's kind of usually one of those.
Sophia, that's a polite way of putting it.
It's just a. There's a whole list of things why people run, and it puts a lot of people in a lot of danger. And the Supreme Court has ruled that fleeing in a vehicle is a violent crime in and of itself, just because you put people in such danger when you do that. Because we have to drive, we still have to drive with due regard. And we've said it on the show before that I sit on the review board for our pursuit. So we call pursuit review. So we review every car cam of every car involved in a pursuit. So if we have the initial car and then we have a few cars behind that involved in that pursuit, but then any car that's going that way that turns its lights and sirens on that starts headed the direction of the pursuit to maybe help, we monitor all of their driving as well. So we have to ensure that they are driving with due regard and that they're slowing down enough at red lights, at stop signs, even yield signs. Are they driving through neighborhoods where kids may be out or people may be out? With due regard. And we're in charge of monitoring that. And, if they're found in violation, it might just be something simple like, hey, you probably need to slow down a little bit more at that yield sign or something like that. We'll pass a note along. But sometimes it can be a write-up depending on the violation. Well,
that's actually kind of a great segue, what you're saying, into our next listener question. And again, this is all pretty much as it applies to driving / pursuits. Someone asked in, what is Fort Wayne Police Department policy when it comes to vehicle pursuits? So due regard, obviously, being
due regard is number one.
Yeah. Which we've done a whole episode, I believe, on just
I believe we did, yes. But we have a lot of things in our policy, just spelling out things that you can't do. So we do not pit here in Fort Wayne. So
what is that?
So a pit maneuver is a tactic to stop a pursuit. And basically what it is like you'll get up to the bumper of another car and gently tap that bumper to send it going. And they usually spin out and come to a halt or...
No kidding. Sounds like something from like Fast and Furious.
Yeah, and it works very well when applied correctly. Now, the problem that...
Can you do it?
No, I've never been trained.
Okay.
So, and that becomes a problem when officers think they know how to do something, but they've never been trained on it, and they attempt to do that and something bad happens. That is negligence on the department's part, on the officer's part, and they can be held liable for that. There's Supreme Court rulings that they can now, if they're not trained in that, they cannot use those techniques. That's why we really push you cannot pit maneuver here, because we don't teach that. There have been people that have learned the pit. I think Deputy Chief McKinney, because he was an emergency vehicle operations and control instructor, he does know how to pit. That does not mean he can use that here, because that is not an authorized tool that we can use here.
Do you know, has anyone ever tried it, even though they're not supposed to? Okay.
No, that would be a serious violation, and you'd probably be up in front of the Board of Safety on that.
That's funny that you got into that as well, because that was another question actually from the same listener who asked about Fort Wayne Police Department policy.
Yeah.
They asked, do you do pit maneuvers?
Yeah. So that's one of the things in our policy that we explicitly state we cannot use.
Has it always been like that, or was there a time when pit
we've
maneuvers
never
were?
pitted here.
Okay.
No, we use stop sticks. And those work very well if we can get them set up, because we know that that is very dangerous for officers to do. We've had a couple of troopers killed last year here in our area just trying to lay those stop sticks.
Yeah, and can you describe those stop sticks so people know what you're talking about?
Yeah, so basically it comes out looking like sort of like an accordion, and we throw it across the lane of traffic. and then we have to get to a safe location. So if you're in a position where you can see the cars coming, you are too close to the pursuit to lay stop sticks, because you won't get them out and then get yourself to a safe location before they'll come on you. And it always seems like, oh, they're way down there, but they're going 100 miles an hour, 80, 90, 100 miles an hour. They'll come at you way faster than you're thinking they will. And that's where we've had some issues where officers just can't get out of the way quick enough, and the suspect either deliberately hits them or in an attempt to avoid the stop sticks, they then in turn hit the officer to where they were going. I think, sometimes I think more times than not it's that, but there have been cases that people have deliberately struck the officers attempting to throw the stop sticks.
Well, and then if you're the driver and you hit the stop sticks, doesn't that also cause you can kind of go a little bit out of control? I've never experienced that.
It's a tire deflation device. So what it does is it puts spikes in the tires, but the spikes are hollow. Mm-hmm. So it allows air to escape. So you'll run over those spikes, and you'll have several spikes within your tire. So it'll go flat pretty quick. It is not supposed to cause an actual accident, like you'll veer out of control so fast because of the
Am I just thinking that from
air.
The movies?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of crashes come too when people try to avoid that, and then they just lose control. Because if you're driving 100, 120, and you do any kind of quick evasive, turn or steer, you're throwing that car off. It's just physics. Mm-hmm. The car's just going to go out of control, and then bad things can happen. But running over the stop sticks, that's not, 9 times out of 10, that's not going to cause some kind of accident like a rollover and things like that.
It's kind of funny, Sophia. This listener, a particular listener, emailed in about some driving policy for the Fort Wayne Police Department, and she's being very kind when she's saying this. She's like, you'll probably hesitate, though, to answer this question and broadcast it to the public because it might encourage crooks to attain this knowledge. Do you feel like you're giving away any insider secrets right now?
I don't. People seen enough YouTube videos to know.
As we just learned earlier from an earlier question that they're seeing.
And a lot of, you see a lot of those videos, especially out of California, because they always have news helicopters, and they're, these long
the big
things.
City areas.
In Atlanta, just recently, I think it was like yesterday or the day, or not yesterday, Wednesday, there was a gentleman who took a bus, hijacked a bus. And I believe one person was killed. I don't know how they were killed. He was taken in custody after they actually got him and the bus stopped, but I don't know how that came about, but he stole an actual bus, like the movie Speed.
Man, what a crazy, though, pursuit to navigate with that, especially if there are other people on the bus.
In Atlanta, on the highway.
Yeah.
And you can see, the news, it's on the news. You can see some of the pursuit. You can go back and probably see hijacked bus in Atlanta, and I'll show you. But you can see, there's heavy traffic, and he's just got this huge bus, and he's just driving it through cars and stuff like that. And I do not know how they got him ultimately stopped, but they did get him into custody.
This other question is, I feel like it's a really loaded question. You're going to probably spend the rest of the time with this that we have with this one, but it is also still kind of in relation to driving. And if you're just tuning in, this is a listener-generated show. These are all questions from listeners. But this one says, what is the Fort Wayne Police Department's policy for providing identification to officers? I'm assuming this person means like me providing you my ID. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
I think so.
Okay.
While you're driving, if I have pulled you over for a traffic violation, infraction, or ordinance violation, you must show me your driver's license when I ask for it. It is a Class C misdemeanor if you don't. When you sign, it's one of those things. Driving is a privilege; it's not a right. And if I have pulled you over for that ordinance, then you need to provide that information. Yes.
What about if I'm bicycling down the sidewalk?
If it's an ordinance violation, again, if there's an ordinance violation that I'm going to probably write you a ticket for, yes, you'd have to show me your ID so I know I'm writing the right ticket to the right person. Now, if you're walking your dog...
That's going to be my next question.
Yeah. Now, if you're walking your dog down the street and you're just minding your own business, walking, and someone comes up to you and says, hey, I need to see your ID. We don't do that. I prefer people carry their ID, and only because of this reason. I work German Fest as a part-time gig, and this is my 25th year of doing that.
Like just recently, this past German Fest we had in town?
Fest we had in the town, and people were coming, and they're coming to a beer tent with no ID. And I'm like,
come on.
You got to have your ID if you're going to drink.
Yep.
And you have to show it to get in. It's a rule excise has, and everyone has to show ID. And I'm like, and just
there are people coming without their ID to drink.
And
I don't
just
get
in
that.
general, I mean, I get it if you're out on a run somewhere and you're not going out on the town. But if you're going out, I would assume you would be carrying your ID. And I'm like, what if you had a medical emergency and there was no one around you? We didn't know who you were. Sometimes if we look people up, if we had them in the past and we know they've had a medical emergency due to diabetes or heart problems or something like that, we can put little comments in their field like diabetic or something like that at least if we know a name, we can look up real quick or call dispatch like, hey, look up this name and see if there's anything we need to be aware of. And we might be able to help you faster than if we don't know who you are and we're trying to figure out what's going on. And, so for me, it's like, I'm like, that's my old mom thing. What if you end up dead in a ditch and I don't know who you are and we have to wait and get fingerprints and all that stuff. So it's just like, I'm not going to ask for your ID because that's illegal for me to do unless I believe I have a suspicion that you have been involved in a crime or about to commit a crime or committed a crime or you fit a description. And
so if you have suspicion of those things,
yes,
and you ask for ID, that individual legally has to give you their ID?
It's Terry v. Ohio. It's a Supreme Court case that came out, I believe, in 1968.
Really putting you on the spot.
Yeah, and that's what kind of garners all of that. We have to have reasonable suspicion. Now, we just can't just go and ask because Kayla's walking down the street that, I need to get her ID. No, there has to be an articulable instance where we have, suspicion that it's basically like the stop and frisk rule. Like I can pat you down during that time if I feel I'm in danger. Like I always liken it to this. So we're walking down the street on a nice summer day. It's 90 degrees out, but you have a winter trench coat on and you have a ski mask on and you're walking down the street and there's a big bulge on your side. That looks really suspicious, especially if we've had instances where we've had armed robberies in this area. Is it a high drug area? There's all these things you need to articulate to why I'm stopping this person. And I can stop him or her and pat them down. It's not a search, it's a pat down for my safety, for your safety. And I can actually, while I'm doing this, put you in handcuffs while I do that. Okay. You're not under arrest, you're being detained. Now, as soon as I find that you do not have anything on you, then I need to immediately take off those cuffs. But while I'm conducting this little short investigation, it can't be long in duration. Just enough to make sure that I'm safe, you're safe, and all this kind of thing. Then, but you have to articulate all that. It's 90 degrees, it's 98% humidity. They're walking around in a big, long trench coat, large boulder on the side. My experience as an officer, it looked like a shotgun or a rifle. And this is a high crime area with maybe we've had a lot of armed robberies or something. And that's, I think, I want to say that's where Terry originated. Was an officer had seen three men in kind of those circumstances. They were casing, was what they called it back in '68, casing an establishment to rob.
I would still call it that now in 2024.
Yeah. And he ended up stopping all three of them because they had made several trips looking in the windows and they'd come back and confer. And then another one would go around another side looking more windows and confer. And he's sitting there watching. He'd been an officer for like over 30 years and a detective for like 24. And he was just walking a beat one day and kind of saw them, thought it was odd, couldn't say why he thought it was odd. But then as time progressed, he articulated all those things. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court because they tried to suppress the gun that they had found on Terry. And went all the way to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court ruled that, you know what, he had articulable information and his experience in the neighborhood was high crime, and all the things he articulated in that, like they looked like they were making these movements, like they were about to rob this place. And probably they were, I would say. But then the Supreme Court ruled like, yeah, he can justify his safety and someone else's with a slight pat down. And he felt what he knew in his experience to be a revolver. and then pulled it out, and it was a revolver.
Really quick, Sophia, because we've only got like 60 seconds.
Oh my gosh.
But let's say it's the scenario of you're walking up to the trench coat individual, right? And you're like, yo, bro, I need to pat you down and I need your ID. Like, I'm assuming you would ask for the ID in that moment, right? Did they, in that moment, did they have to give you their ID?
I don't know that I would ask for the ID until I was done with the pat down, because I just want to ensure my safety first and foremost, and other people's around me that might be around me.
And obviously if they're...
And I'll be talking to this person like, hey, why are you wearing this coat? It's 90 degrees out, and it may be a legitimate reason, and that bulge may be something else, but as you talk to the person and your answers aren't kind of translated very well from them, it's like, okay, this is even more suspicious.
Now I need your ID.
Yeah, I mean, what's your name? And,
and they legally would have to give it to you in that scenario.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for people who believe police officers are just walking around willy-nilly, infringing on people's constitutional rights, that is not happening. I suppose there could be some offshoot chances in some places.
Yeah, we have these auditors that go around and try and get people, police in a trick bag, and they do. I mean, and they do. And some officers fall prey to that. We try to train to that, and this is what you can and you can't do. And I mean, instead of working with someone, it's like, hey, you're really not supposed to ask for my ID. Just tell, we'll have a conversation. But as officers, we really need to know what the law is and what we can and can't do. And, we try to do our best. But again, we're human beings. Yeah. And I can't remember every law that you focus in on. But I've got 8,000 other laws.
One tiny minute detail.
Figure out.
I told you the whole second half of the show was going to be all about identification, and sure enough, here we are. If you're really into the vehicle pursuit stuff, like I mentioned, Sophia and I have done a full episode on just that before. You can download any of our previous episodes anywhere you download a podcast. Just search for Unholstered. Your town, your team, your topics. This is Unholstered.
Thanks for listening to Unholstered. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search Unholstered.
Podcasts by Federated Media.